Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero, joined today by...
I'm your co-host, Courtney.
All right, Miss Courtney, as we get started today, I want to reference a piece recently played on Kara Swisher's podcast, On. If you don't know On, check it out. It's available wherever you get your podcast. As for Heather Cox Richardson, she is sort of the anchor that holds Substack in place and makes it a serious spot for journalism. She's also a historian who, after listening to her speak, changed my mind about the presidential race completely. She reframed the conversation around last week's debate and again changed my mind. She started with essentially who decided to ignore Trump's confused, yammering, and lie-riddled performance. We're used to this sort of ignorance from Fox News or Newsmax, but from legacy media like CNN or the New York Times, it's simply unacceptable. It has been the New York Times who has put out a regular hit piece on Joe Biden by the little worm who often appears on Morning Joe. Again, Joe Scarborough is someone to ignore and avoid if you're a liberal, because this is the man who carried water for the Republican Party during the election of 2000, where the Republican Party of Florida essentially stole a presidential election from Al Gore, which of course led to war and trillions of dollars of debt created by George W. Bush, not to mention the largest recession since the Great Depression. The way this was reframed to me was, or at least the way I understood it was, essentially Joe Biden had a bad debate performance. That's fine. It was a very odd debate format, for one thing, and he was dealing with a literal fire hose of lies. So many, so fast, about his own record, taking credit for things Joe Biden did, like reducing insulin to $35 a month for patients who need the life-saving drug, that it would have left almost anyone standing there with their mouth open, considering how exactly to respond to that in the 120 seconds allotted to them. And if by some miracle Donald Trump ends up winning this election, Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, who will both be out of the job because CNN will be closed immediately under the Trump dictatorship, will also be in large part to blame for his presidency. But as we move forward, we intend to move beyond what happened on debate night and talk about all of the good Joe Biden has done and the opportunity he has to right the ship, so to speak, beginning this evening. By the time you would have heard this, it would have already happened. We would have our answer as to whether or not Joe seems up to the job, as he is currently in Madison, Wisconsin, as we record this, and has given remarks and will now sit down for a lengthy interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos. Miss Courtney, your thoughts on the state of the race at this moment?
I almost wonder if people are so used to Trump's lies and antics that they kind of forget about it. They just expect it, and I think that they've only focused on Biden's subpar debate because it was so out of character for him, because it was so different. We don't expect that, so I think that's why the focus is kind of on Biden. That we're just so used to Trump being like this that it's just another day for him.
Heather Cox Richardson, in her infinite wisdom, actually looked at the transcript. As a historian, she's used to looking at documents, and the transcript showed a totally different story than the television camera showed. It showed one man giving very limited answers and another man screaming into the microphone as many lies as he possibly could in 120 seconds, fulfilling the prophecy laid out by now imprisoned former Trump aide Steve Bannon, who said simply, quote, fill the zone with shit. And that seems to be the tack Trump took in last Thursday's debate. Now, I've heard, this is very recent, this is new reporting from the Washington Post that actually weren't in our show notes for today, but Democratic Congressman Mark Warner, a very popular senator, a Democrat from a Democratic state, is trying to assemble a group of senators to approach President Biden about resigning from the ticket. Because let's be clear, the only way Joe Biden will not be the Democratic nominee in November versus Trump, which is 4.5 months away, is if he personally chooses to step down. He cannot be forced off the ticket. The 3,900 some odd delegates he has are his. He can decide to stay, he can decide to go, but it seems he's defiantly going to stay. And by the way, Heather Cox Richardson did lay this out as a historian, especially a historian of the Republican Party, that back in 1864, there was a presidential election, a Republican and a Democrat. The nation was far more divided, violently divided, at that particular point in time. And the then President of the United States was approached with the same conundrum. Sir, you simply cannot win. It's time to replace you at the top of the ticket and get people fired up again. Poll numbers are dismal. And these were the early days of polling, and we're basically only polling about 15 states at that point. But still, it spelled trouble for the Republican incumbent. That Republican incumbent did stay on the ticket. He defied his entire party, much to their chagrin, and was summarily reelected in November of 1864. And of course, that man's name was Abraham Lincoln. Now, we've done a lot of comparing Joe Biden to FDR, a lot of comparing Joe Biden to Lyndon B. Johnson. But if he manages to pull this off, we'll have to put him in the category with Abraham Lincoln. George Washington would be the only president left to surpass at that point. And I'm not saying he's surpassing Abraham Lincoln, but from an electoral perspective, he's facing the same sort of headwinds that Abraham Lincoln faced in 1864. Also, Ronald Reagan was reelected at age 73 in 1984. 40 years of medical science. 73 in 1984 is over 90 in today's medical and scientific world. Think about that for a moment. 73 in 1984 was probably life expectancy for a white male in the United States of America. And a man we later learned had full-blown Alzheimer's and really didn't even run the second term. He didn't run the country after winning a second term. He won 49 states, by the way. His wife did, Nancy Reagan, because, well, let's face it, Ronald was lost somewhere in a dementia-induced state. So that's a little food for thought. My opinion on this has changed dramatically over the last few days, as many of my personal icons, personal heroes, and Miss Courtney can attest to this. I start most Tuesday through Fridays off by listening to Countdown with Keith Olbermann, and I think it broke his heart to accept the idea that Biden may need to be replaced at the top of the ticket. But let's stop for a moment and think about what that would mean. First of all, it would mean that candidate would have only 4 months to prepare for a head-to-head race with Donald Trump. Plus, we have to account for early voting, which will start in September in some states. Also, campaign financing. If that person is not Kamala Harris, then raising enough money to actually compete would be difficult. It would not be easily transferable unless that candidate were Kamala Harris. Thirdly, Kamala Harris would not be allowed to pick her own vice president. In fact, she would have to rely on Congress, meaning the Senate and the House, to appoint a vice president for her. Imagine what a fight that will be with Republicans in charge of one chamber or the other, and currently in charge of the House of Representatives by one single vote. So, considering all of that, and considering the wake-up call, the sudden attention, the burst of energy surrounding Joe Biden, good or bad, as they say, all press is good press, may have done just exactly the opposite of what Mark Warner, a coward, a man who helped Hillary Clinton lose the 2016 campaign by not doing enough, by putting on one anemic performance after another in debates against Mike Pence, of all people. This world-class statesman, Mark Warner, has decided to stick his neck out, literally stick his neck out, and decide to go after the sitting and successful president of the United States. And again, Courtney, I turn to you for thoughts on this.
I think it's kind of a ballsy move to begin with for Warner to ask that of the president. But I also think, like you said, the election's only 4.5 months away.
Right.
I mean, aside from the money and everything else that would go into it, I mean, trying to get a new candidate in there is just going to turn the Democratic Party upside down. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going to be dividing voters who still really want Biden to a new runner. I think it's just too close to the race to really get in this. I think it's going to just have to be Biden, and we need to go all in and support him.
Yes, and I expected Biden to be competing against Fox propaganda or Newsmax propaganda or maybe even a little bit of CNN sensationalism. What I didn't expect was for him to have to compete against all of those forces, the Republican Party and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all of these legacy news outlets that should, well, damn well know better. And I'm not saying that I'm asking for some sort of tilted coverage by mainstream news outlets, just fair coverage. I mean, where has all of the talk been about the absolute demented performance put on by Donald Trump? A man who, by the way, is in a terribly sticky situation with his own party at the current moment because he won't support a national abortion ban and instead wants to leave it up to the states, which is creating problems with his evangelical base. And we know any dip in turnout would be completely disastrous for Donald Trump. This also gives Biden an opportunity, in my opinion, with all of this hype, all of this heat, all of these eyeballs on Biden. It almost seems like it happened on purpose, because suddenly Biden's people, Democrats especially, aren't just sort of floating through this campaign season wishing Biden was a younger man. And now they are enthusiastically engaged on one side of the fence or the other. But if you look at the North Carolina rally, Joe couldn't get a word in edgewise. That was a week ago today, and we're recording this on Friday, July the 5th, when, of course, they're chanting Joe, Joe, Joe. Then he's on to Madison, Wisconsin for the exact sort of turnout, the exact sort of energy that had been sort of missing for Biden up to this point in the campaign. So, starting with the New York Times, and it's Biden hitman, the little worm that he is, the maggot that fell off the gut wagon, Peter Baker, has had an almost gleeful look on his face each morning on Morning Joe. Again, don't watch Morning Joe. I watch Morning Joe as research for this podcast. Joe Scarborough is the most full of shit man in media, and Peter Baker, well, again, a pathetic little worm who has gone maybe a week over the last 4 years without writing at least one article, sometimes as many as 3, about Joe Biden's age, leaving out the fact he doesn't have the comorbidities like, being 300 pounds and living on McDonald's and Diet Cokes the way Donald Trump does. Completely ignoring all that, completely ignoring the fascistic language, the guarantee that our democracy will end January 20th, 2025, ignoring the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, which is so toxic that even Donald Trump's trying to run away from it. Completely ignoring all that, Peter Baker has put his nerdy little glasses on and his 5'2" body and gone out and written these hit pieces. There's nothing else that can be said for it, simply because the President of the United States will not give up hours of his time to sit down with a newspaper run by the Salzburger family that probably only reaches about 500,000 subscribers in the United States. Something no one will see because it's an effing newspaper, and this is 2024. People no longer read newspapers. If they did, Biden would be leading this whole horse and pony show by 20 or so points. But that's not the case.
I'm thinking that everybody's focusing on Biden's age because they don't have anything else to focus on. Like, they've got no ground. Like, the only thing they can is grasp at he's too old and just try to hound that home. And speaking of newspapers, yes, nobody reads them because every day I go to work, there's a pile of about 3 of them at the front door.
No, people don't. And I don't blame Biden a bit for, telling the New York Times, clean up your coverage of me. And at this point, if I were President Biden, I would actually offer the New York Times a full-length, 3 hours, however long you want to do it, hard-hitting interview with, someone like Maggie Haberman, as much as I despise Maggie Haberman. But it's going to cost them Peter Baker. I would do the same thing with NBC. It's going to cost you Peter Baker. Simply because Peter Baker has decided on his own, or at least according to him on his own, to write up to 3 pieces a week on Joe Biden's age when this country is in an existential situation and is suffering from an existential threat of fascism. Fascism, for Christ's sake. At some point, legacy media has to be held accountable the same way right-wing media needs to be held accountable. And again, we're not asking for biased coverage, just fair coverage. Where are the comorbidity 78-year-old articles about demented J. Trump? Felon J. Trump. Let's not forget that. And who knows? For all we know, in September, when they have the second debate, this could have been a setup to blindside Trump. Trump comes out, does the same thing all over again, and runs into an entirely different Joe Biden. Maybe Biden wasn't taking the election seriously enough up until that point. I don't know, and I simply don't care. But this is absolute party suicide. This would cost us Senate seats in states we're already winning. This would cost us dearly, and it would almost guarantee a Trump presidency, as we have right-wing congressmen from places like Central Texas saying that American democracy would survive Trump and they expect Trump to win. Of course, they are in very special situations, like Congressman Doggett, who represents Austin, Texas. So he sort of has to walk a fine line. And again, with Biden having a bad debate performance, they're trying to walk that line without creating too much consternation. But comments like that aren't going to get you anywhere. And Mark Warner, this is specifically aimed at you, my friend. What type of low-life SOB who has had so many successful judges placed on benches, so many successful pieces of legislation passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Build Back Better Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the Chips and Science Act, the Gun Reform Bill, allowing Medicare, finally, after all these years, to negotiate prices with pharmaceutical companies. These were all things that I believe you campaigned for when you were on the failing ticket that was Hillary Clinton's in 2016. Perhaps Hillary Clinton wasn't the wrong choice. Perhaps you were the wrong choice, Mr. Warner. Now that is an interesting juxtaposition to me, because Mark Warner, who's been celebrated as a senator, was certainly a terrible vice presidential candidate. In fact, most people don't even remember who you are. So go ahead, do your work behind the scenes to get together a group of senators who want to see Joe Biden step down. What Tammy Baldwin, Senator of Wisconsin, who's running for re-election there, did today by not rescheduling her plans around a visit from the President of the United States, who is also of her party, was cowardly. But I think over the next month or so, we're going to see a different Joe Biden, and the Joe Biden we've needed to see this whole time. But again, when you play the same song over and over again, people get sick of it. You need to give them about 3 months of it, and that seems to be what the Biden campaign is doing. By the way, another quick note, the Biden campaign has bought up all of the significant ad space around the July 15 through 18 Republican National Convention. So all the Republicans tuning in to see that will see as much of Joe Biden and as much of Joe Biden's messaging as they will from any singular Republican.
That is interesting. Oh, one thing I did notice with Joe Biden at the debate, for people that did watch it, was he seemed to be angry Joe, but the way that it was set up, like you said, it was so odd. He couldn't be angry Joe.
Right.
Like, if you watched his face, he was pissed about some of the things Trump was saying. But like you said, he only had 120 seconds to form a thought process and try to figure out everything he was going to say. That I just don't think it worked in his favor because Trump was so full of shit.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree with everything you said.
Like, I think if we just gave him the floor and let him have at it, like, I think we'd see a very, very different debate.
Even if we had seen a traditional debate circa like 2020, and of course the National Committee on Presidential Debates was left out of this, so this debate was entirely drawn up by CNN. It was their format, the way they decided they want to do it, by killing mics. And if you remember in 2020, there's that famous moment when Biden's trying to speak, Trump won't shut up with his fire hose, and that's when Biden infamously says, "Would you shut up, man?" I mean, that was a moment in 2020 where America sort of shifted. Anybody who was kind of on the fence completely shifted to the Biden camp. But we don't need a whole lot of people to shift toward the Biden camp. We just need Biden voters to reemerge, if you will. Trump hasn't done a single thing, not one single thing, to reach out to new voters. He's alienated migrants. He's alienated Hispanics. He's alienated the LGBTQ community. He's alienated women. He's done everything except draw in more ignorant white men, which was his base to begin with. So,
and there's only so many of those in the world. Like,
so many.
You can only get so many votes from straight white males.
That's it, and that's where we're at right now. Biden's lead needs to go back up into the 20s among women, and it has sank a little bit. We're going to get hit hard when the weekend polls are done. So Monday, when the polls come out, expect horrible news. Biden may be in a dead heat in New Jersey against Donald Trump, a reliably blue state. He may even be down a point or two in a state like Virginia. However, the election is not day after tomorrow. So again, give the man with more money, more resources, and more experience beating Donald Trump, because again, Joe Biden has never lost an election, the opportunity to regain his bearings. We have to, because we made this decision a long time ago, ride or die with Joe Biden, period. Because again, creating this insane situation where we'd have some sort of mini primary. They're talking about now. There's a billionaire mega donor to the Democratic Party who has refrained from giving any money so far to the Biden-Harris re-election campaign because he wants a mini primary. At this point in the race, a mini primary against, I guess, including Gretchen Whitmer, Democratic governor of Michigan, Josh Shapiro, Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Gavin Newsom of California. I love Gavin. I think Gavin's sharp. He's an excellent president. An excellent governor. But let's just say the word again. California. And $6 a gallon gas. End of campaign. That's more or less where you would be if you're a California governor who didn't have 2 years to prep and campaign for president. Somebody expected to change America's mind about California in 2 months at that point before the first ballot started being cast.
It is kind of funny that they've raised so much money still, like without that mega donor. Kind of a big screw you. Like we don't need it. They still have raised so much money that.
And it's coming grassroots too, as Bernie Sanders gets more and more involved, who is the king of grassroots donations. So it's been wild. And again, my opinion has shifted on this. I thought after it happened, after listening to that first day's round of news, after the debate, that Biden simply had to go. That there was just no way to salvage this thing. He had to go. Then I stopped and gave it more thought and realized what an awful situation we would be in without Biden atop the ticket. Where would we turn? Secondly, everywhere he's losing or everywhere he's down, he's within the margin of error, with the exception of maybe one state. He's not losing any states he's not supposed to be losing. Again, New Jersey was too close for comfort. Virginia is closer than it should be. Minnesota is closer than it should be. But all of that's correctable. And using Kamala Harris in a more sophisticated way, because she is multiracial, because she is a woman, she needs to be the face of restoring Roe v. Wade. She needs to be the face of interaction with young voters, college speeches and things of that nature. She's going to be the face of the Democratic Party post 2028. Again, I hate to say this to Gavin Newsom lovers, but Gavin Newsom is not going to be the Democratic candidate for president now or in the near future. He's 55 now, and unless you want him in there at 75, facing the same issue Joe Biden's facing now, Gavin Newsom will not be president simply because $6 a gallon gas in California, 3.5 years to get a permit to build a solar panel or put solar panels on your house. California is so weighed down by regulation that it's going to be a terribly difficult lift for a former governor of the state of California to run for president and win. Maybe he could have run for Senate, but now there won't be an open Senate seat in the state of California for the next 30 years.
Personally, I would vote for Harris if she ran now, but like we've talked about, we really need to get behind Biden. It needs to be, like you said, ride or die. It's too late in the game to be dividing the party. But I do agree that Harris needs to get out more and be a little more involved in everything going on. While she's not taking a back burner, it seems like she's just not in the public eye as much as like Biden is. I think if she got out there and started really trying to get those voters, especially, the biracial and the female voters, that I think she could really be an asset to the campaign.
I think that's why they chose her in the first place back in 2020. She's an asset. She doesn't really pull you down in any way. She's not going to ultimately be the person designing policy. She's not ultimately going to be the person making the decision whether to drop a bomb here or whatever. She is a senior level advisor to a president who has 50 years of experience doing this. So I trust Joe Biden implicitly. I trust Joe Biden.
I'm just so tired of hearing about his age anyway. It's just beating a dead horse.
And then again, that leads me right into my next piece. We expect as Democrats every election to face voter suppression, to face gerrymandering, to face propaganda from Fox News, to face propaganda from Newsmax, to face propaganda from Republican candidates, to to face all of these hurdles. But we don't expect to face hurdles with publications like the New York Times. And let's look for a moment. Who listens to the New York Times or reads the New York Times, either the digital version or the actual paper itself? Let's see. They would be, headline sell better. Would be their targeted demographic would be college educated, white, metropolitan, and overwhelmingly liberal. So does attacking a president who was viewed as a moderate but is very much a liberal make any sense at all? Do you think this is helping your subscriber base, the New York Times? And by the way, Washington Post, you're not out of the woods either, because Jeff Bezos still hasn't fired Will Lewis, former Rupert Murdoch employee. So a former tabloid chief who doesn't understand how newsrooms work, because he didn't work in a real newsroom. He worked in a crap shack for sake of candor. But I wrote out a few headlines, and let's see if these would pass muster. Headline: Trump overwhelms Biden with so many lies that he looks doddering when trying to respond. Again, I'll read that. Trump overwhelms Biden with so many lies that he looks doddering when trying to respond. How does that headline sound? Would that work, New York Times? How about this one? Another: Biden debate performance anemic. Trump incompetent and responses riddled with lies. And gives Americans a glimpse into the mindset of a felon. Again, I'll read that one more time. Biden debate performance anemic. Trump's incoherent, riddled with lies, and gives America a glimpse into the mind of a felon.
Speaking of felons, there has been nowhere near enough coverage on that from anybody.
Right.
that Trump 34 counts of felon, like he's a felon. Nobody's paying any attention to that. He can't even vote in the election he's supposedly running for. Like, why is that not like at the forefront of everybody's mind?
You know, again, we expected all of these things like deep fake videos. We expected right-wing media to run with lie after lie after lie. But what we didn't expect was having to face off against, real mainstream legacy media. Maybe with the exception of ABC, because the only Sunday morning legacy news show, starting with Meet the Press, then Face the Nation on CBS. By the way, Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, quit media. Get out now. You're absolutely awful. You're going to go the way of David Gregory, and people don't know David Gregory, but after the untimely death of the great Tim Russert, which is right when they should have closed the door on Meet the Press, the longest running show in television history, the last great newsman to work at Meet the Press on NBC, they handed it off to Chief White House Correspondent David Gregory, who lasted, a couple of months before he was finally run off the air. Then they replaced him with the eternal loser that is Chuck Todd. And due to a lack of options, Chuck Todd held the job for several years before he was finally fired, and they brought in Kristen Welker. Kristen Welker hosted a town hall with Donald Trump about a week after getting the job and completely 100% bombed. She didn't even try to fact check or push back on Trump's deluge of lies the way Caitlin Collins from CNN had just a few weeks earlier. So, shameless. Now, as for Margaret Brennan, you're a humiliation. Not from your outfits to your general demeanor, as if you're a person to be taken seriously in any way, shape, or form. You simply are not. However, ABC's morning news program on Sundays that competes with Meet the Press and Face the Nation is hosted by George Stephanopoulos. And again, this is not sexist in any way, shape, or form. It's just factual. George Stephanopoulos is 10 times the newsman, or news person, I should say, that Margaret Brennan or Kristen Welker could ever hope to be. As MSNBC continues to burn itself to the ground, NBC News is following close behind. CBS News doesn't even register with most people. ABC News appears to be sort of coming out the winner in this competition of news organizations, legacy news organizations, at least in my humble opinion. Now, again, I just mentioned Biden's biggest foe being the mainstream news outlets. But let's talk a little bit about what this incompetent, doddering old man has accomplished. The Biden economy. How about highlighting the Biden economy? I would like to see wall-to-wall coverage of unemployment, the longest run of unemployment this low in more than 50 years. One incredible job performance after another. And as Joe Biden just said in Wisconsin, was I too old to create 15.7 million jobs? Was I too old to expand the Affordable Care Act to millions more Americans? Was I too old to forgive something, I think it's $125 billion in student loans? Was I too old to cap the price of insulin at $35 a month? Was I too old to pass the CHIPS and Science Act, bringing major semiconductor manufacturing and chips manufacturing back to the United States? Was I too old to hold off China importing $15,000 EVs and completely crushing the American EV market, Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, and of course those pieces of shit over at Tesla? Was Biden too old then? Because he's only a year older. The pressures of being president have not affected Joe Biden the way they would have a 45-year-old, the way they did a Bill Clinton. There was a clear difference in Bill Clinton circa 92 and Bill Clinton circa 98.
I mean, look at how much grayer Obama was after his term.
But
I mean, it's hard, and for him to do that at his age,
it's a difficult job. I'm not trying to underscore, or I'm trying to underplay how taxing it is to be president, and then perhaps that's why I think Joe needed a good kick in the ass. I really do. And people like Mark Warner or Congressman Daggett, you're going too far. Mark Warner, tread lightly, because history, like Heather Cox Richardson, who writes history, will not be kind to you if you push this whole thing too hard. It's time to drop it and reunify as a party, as Biden is showing us, and at least give him the opportunity to show us that he is 100% up to the job. I think he thought beating Donald Trump a second time would be easy. It wouldn't require a whole lot of time in front of a camera, and he was wrong about that. At least he's been wrong up to this point. But now there's sort of a refocusing at exactly the right time. If we went through a whole process of another primary and picking another candidate and all of this nightmare and figuring out what to do about a vice president and figuring out what to do with this money and with these ad buys, not only that, but then you'd be telling Democratic door knockers, people so dedicated to the cause that they are volunteered to get out in this heat in states like Georgia and states like North Carolina. Trust us, we're right next door to North Carolina, and it is
brutal.
Hot. It is hot.
The real field temperature for the last few days has been over 100.
So we're talking about people out here dealing with three-figure temperatures, oppressive heat and humidity, knocking on doors, who are true believers in the Biden-Harris administration, and now we're supposed to reprogram those people to come up with something totally different.
Everything else aside, it really is just too late in the game to try to get a new candidate, and they should know better. And they just need to rally behind Biden. I mean, he's gonna do a good job. He's done a good job. We just need to finish it out. And I think you're right that Biden did need that kind of kick in the ass for it. I think, and it, not just Biden. I think Democratic voters did too.
Oh,
you know,
Democratic
everybody
voters
needed
have been failing.
to just be like, wait a minute, like we need to really buckle down.
Right. So 15.7 million new jobs, standing up for democracy around the world at a time when many, even Western European countries, are sliding towards autocracy. France, Italy's already there. Poland, which has sort of corrected itself, and then of course, Belarus, which has completely aligned itself with Russia, as has Viktor Orban's Hungary. Which, by the way, these political strongmen are actually weak men who just have a coalition around them that allow them to be elected. They do things like crater economies. They do things like drive inflation through the roof. If Donald Trump were elected president a second time, the realignment that would occur would be the United States, Russia, China, and North Korea. I don't know about you, Miss Courtney, but I'd much rather be aligned with Australia, our partners in South America, the United Kingdom, France, Holland, Germany, Northern Europe, Scandinavian nations, obviously. I'd much rather be aligned with them than hostile states like Russia, China, and North effing Korea. I mean, it's absurd, but that is exactly where we would be. And of course, the puny little nation of Hungary. No offense to Hungarians, but offense to Hungarians. After all, you're the ones who elected this asshole. So Viktor Orban and his little $120 billion a year GDP, while the United States rolls along at almost $30 trillion, not billion, dollar a year economy, I think will be fine. Also, if Biden's reelected, when Biden's reelected, the 2025 is the year the Trump tax cuts expire, removing $2.7 trillion from the national debt annually. That's what Donald Trump did. He passed one piece of legislation in 4 years. 2 of those years, he had complete control of the House and the Senate, and he passed one piece of legislation, and that was a $2.7 trillion per year tax cut for his wealthy friends. Doesn't exactly seem like a populist to me. It seems like a classist to me. A man who sees wealthy people as simply more important, especially himself, and the rest of us as just a nuisance.
It's appalling too that everybody just kind of brushes that under the rug. Like it's all and that's what bothers me is it's all about Biden, which it should be about Biden, but nobody brings up anything about Trump. Like, there's no bad press for Trump. Like, nobody says anything. Nobody brings to light, hey, he's lying. He's doing this. He's doing that. Like, we all just kind of ignore it.
It seems to me that CNN and CBS, CNN, MSNBC, whomever, needs somebody there 24/7 to drive home the fact convicted felon Donald Trump is about to give a speech in front of the ellipse at the House of Representatives. The convicted felon Donald Trump, and then after it's over, go through lie by lie and correct him. Oh, actually, it was not convicted felon Donald Trump who passed the cap on insulin prices at $35 a month. In fact, it got no Republican support. That was done by President Joe Biden.
He should no longer be referred to as former President Trump. It should be convicted felon Trump.
Convicted felon, former President Donald Trump. However you want to do it, that's fine. Former president and convicted felon.
Like, we need to drive that point home that he is a convicted felon. Like,
and the media has failed us. So now, understanding that the media is going to fail you, understanding that you're going to have to create your own narrative, understanding that you have all of the ad buys, whether they be media ad buys through social media, and online ad buys, or ad buys on traditional cable television, you have the high ground when it comes to money and the ability to spend it in an intelligent way. So brand Trump yourself, Biden campaign. He has a lot of really smart people around him. He's obviously taken their advice and made the decision that he's not going anywhere. And those who challenge him will be primaried and lose, including Mark Warner. Mark Warner's been a wonderful senator from Virginia, but Virginia's full of great Democrats. And Mark Warner is not the only person who could do that job. And if he pushes too hard against a president who would have saved us not once, but twice from a dictatorial takeover by demented felon and former President Donald Trump, Mark Warner will come out looking stupid and will and should lose his seat as a senator from Virginia, one of the most prestigious states to serve in the United States of America. So, as we await the public's view, or at least what the media will tell us is the public's view of the George Stephanopoulos interview, we are kind of wrapping it up here at the Magnolia Media Podcast. A couple of last little points to make. We've said that we've talked about George Stephanopoulos being the last real great newsman in America. We've talked about being very careful when listening to or watching Morning Joe, hosted by Joe Scarborough, a man who carried water for the Republican Party of Florida when they helped overturn the election results of 2000. A man who carried water for Newt Gingrich, a man so demented he thought he could get rid of the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, then impeach his Vice President, Al Gore, and somehow backdoor his way into being President of the United States. And one of his biggest supporters, a man who can be seen there in the background if you go and look at the footage, Joe Scarborough. And somehow he's supposed to be the lead voice, the untouchable man at a liberal news outlet, or at least was designed to be a liberal news outlet, in MSNBC. So, we don't want a repeat of 2000. We don't want the election to be that close. We have the state of Wisconsin opening up drop boxes again, so people in Wisconsin will be able to vote via drop boxes. That was banned 2 years ago by what was then a conservative Supreme Court in the state of Wisconsin. Since then, Judge Janet Protasewicz was elected Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and this is a reminder, something I like to remind people of when it comes to polls. Polls are a snapshot. They're also created. They're not natural. Polls with enough money, you can create a poll that says anything, that confirms anything. You can get a poll to say 64% of Americans believe the world is flat, that the earth is flat. That's the level of absurdity. And the example I always go to is on election day for that Chief Justice seat in the state of Wisconsin, which was being followed around the nation, pollster after pollster after pollster, and exit polls, meaning as people come out of the polling booth, had Judge Protasewicz, Judge Janet as she goes by, losing that Chief Justice of the Supreme Court election by anywhere from 2 to 3 points. Usually exit polls are looked at as golden, solid, no problem. We got it. The conservatives locked it up, so nothing major is going to change in the state of Wisconsin. She won by 11 points. 11 effing points. That's a 14 or 15 point miscalculation by the these pollsters, and Nate Silver and group, who realized that their shelf life is beginning to expire. So they have to keep every election close, even when they're not all that close. So keep an eye on that. If you see a poll with Biden trailing by a point or two, it's not a stretch to say Biden is probably leading by 4, 5, or 6 points. I just returned from New York City, and believe me, there's not a Trump voter that I could hit with a rock in any direction standing on the corner of 54th Street. It was magical. And more about that on my Instagram. Check it out by searching Magnolia John 2024 on Instagram. You'll find me on Threads using the same name, and on Twitter X by searching Magnolia John. That pretty much does it for me, Miss Courtney. Any final thoughts from you?
No, just as we get closer to the election, remember, people, don't vote for a goddamn felon.
Yeah, no shit.
Like, don't vote for somebody who can't even vote for themselves.
Right, or can't own a gun. And again, on the whole gun thing, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. There are 400 million guns in the United States. It's something we're just going to have to deal with. We do need, restrictive gun laws or red flag laws, or some things that could help, mitigate some of the mass carnage we see in the United States. But that's something that'll just take time. So don't judge one too harshly based on the state of gun violence, because that ship sailed a long time ago.
Courtesy of Republicans.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Republicans, for turning our streets, our
schools,
our schools, our fairs, our parks, our concerts, our movie theaters, our gathering, our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, and to shooting ranges for deranged people who can buy AR-15s with 32-round magazines in an hour or so at the age of 18. 18.
I think when I bought my gun, it was probably at least about a 2-hour process to go through everything.
2 hours to walk into a gun shop and leave with a weapon that,
was registered to me.
That was registered to you, and again, with all the ammunition you could buy. And to think that somebody could have done the same thing, not with a little bedside table gun, because you and I are both gun owners, but with an AR-15, and go destroy lives by shooting children. And this Supreme Court upholding bump stocks, essentially allowing automatic guns on the streets, fully automatic guns that require one trigger pull, because of a lowly corrupt piece of shit named Clarence Thomas. And this is what I would do. And here's the thing. Because of the Supreme Court basically ruling that a president is king, I don't think it much matters whether Biden wins or loses. Who's to say Biden has to leave?
This is true. I did not think about that.
I would take the 6.
Trump wouldn't do it.
Trump wouldn't leave. So I would take, and the first thing I would do is write a presidential arrest warrant, sort of 19th century style, for the 6 conservatives on the Supreme Court. I would nominate 6 more, expanding the court out to 15, so that the 6 conservatives could spend the last, especially Sam Alito's in his 70s, John Roberts in his 70s, Clarence Thomas is in his 70s, almost 80. So they can spend the last few rotten years of their lives watching all of their work be undone by liberals. All of it. Everything. Every nasty, terrible piece of litigation that they've heard, every democratic norm they've overturned, be corrected by a Biden regime. It wouldn't be a Biden presidency at that point. It would be a hostile takeover to stave off the impending doom that would be another Trump presidency.
I don't foresee Biden doing that, just because he seems like the kind of person that stands for democracy and wants things to, be a democracy. But I almost wonder if that's what's best for us. If he just said, you know what, I am going to do it.
There's not going to be an election. Everybody pack it up and go home. I'm commander-in-chief, so unless you have thermonuclear weapons, there's no point in challenging anything I have to say. And I would rather it be him than Donald Trump.
Because you know damn well if that goes into effect and Donald Trump wins in the 4 years, we all know what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about that.
Assuming he isn't dead by then. I am surprised he's lasted
Yeah,
this
I
long.
am too. I don't. If you wanted to put a money line on who survives the next 4 years, that's Biden minus 100, Trump plus 100. There's almost no chance that a man who treats his body that way with all of the drugs, all of the lack of sleep, all of the hamburgers from McDonald's, the Diet Cokes, is going to make it another 4 years. But anyway, we shall see. Any last words from you, Miss Courtney, before I sign us out?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Well, I produced today's episode. Today's episode was obviously engineered by Miss Courtney, who we had back for the first time this week. Apparently a full-time job and an MBA is a lot, so I've done the podcast on my own the last couple of times. Anyhow, we appreciate her joining us again today. This has been the Magnolia Media Podcast. Until next time, be well.